A single merchant's handshake in a shadowy Venetian alleyway would birth an empire that makes today's cartels look like street vendors. You've seen the movies. Pablo Escobar, El Chapo, ruthless kingpins who controlled billions. But what if I told you their entire playbook was stolen? What if every technique, every route, every method of corruption they used was perfected centuries before they were even born? While the world obsesses over Colombian cocaine lords and Mexican drug wars, they've completely missed the real architects of organized trafficking. The masterminds who turned smuggling from desperate acts into sophisticated science. Tonight we're exposing the truth about Venice. Not the romantic city of gondolas and love songs, but a maritime fortress that built the first international drug empire. These weren't thugs with guns. They were aristocrats with ledgers, nobles with networks that spanned continents. Meet Conte Alessandro Grimaldi, a name that commanded respect in every palazzo from the Rialto Bridge to St. Mark's Square. In 1847, while revolution consumed Europe's capitals, Alessandro controlled something far more valuable than armies: the flow of exotic goods through the Mediterranean's most strategic port. The Grimaldi family had built their fortune over 3 centuries, transforming from humble fishermen into merchant royalty. Their warehouses lined the Grand Canal, filled with cardamom from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, and black pepper worth more than gold. Legitimate trade had made them untouchably wealthy. But wealth in Venice was never just about money. It was about survival. The old merchant families were dying. Steamships from Britain and France were crushing traditional trade routes. The Austrian Empire was squeezing Venice with brutal taxation. Ancient fortunes were crumbling faster than the city's foundations. Alessandro watched his competitors disappear one by one. The Morosini family, bankrupt. The Contarini dynasty, reduced to selling their ancestral palazzos. Even the mighty Dandolo merchants were auctioning priceless art collections just to pay their debts. If you're enjoying this untold history, smash that like button, because what Alessandro did next changed everything. The pressure was crushing. Alessandro had 43 employees depending on him. 3 younger brothers who trusted his leadership completely. A pregnant wife carrying the next generation of Grimaldi heirs. Failure meant more than financial ruin. It meant the end of a bloodline that had survived the Black Death, Ottoman Wars, and Napoleon's conquest. That's when the British offered him a proposition. Captain James Morrison from the East India Company approached Alessandro during a routine spice negotiation. Morrison's offer seemed innocent enough. Transport additional cargo alongside the regular shipments, higher profits, exclusive contracts, protection from British naval interference. The cargo was opium, raw, unprocessed, destined for European markets where demand was exploding faster than anyone anticipated. Alessandro knew exactly what Morrison was proposing. He also knew refusal would mean losing British partnerships entirely. Essentially a death sentence for any Mediterranean merchant. Standing in his private study, surrounded by portraits of his ancestors, Alessandro made a choice that would echo through criminal history for centuries. But Alessandro's next shipment wouldn't contain spices. The transformation began with a single modified cargo hold. Alessandro commissioned Venice's most skilled shipbuilders to retrofit his largest merchant vessel, the Santa Lucia. To customs officials, it appeared identical to any spice trader. But hidden beneath false floors lay compartments designed for far more valuable cargo than cardamom. The first opium shipment arrived from Calcutta in September 1847. Raw blocks wrapped in silk, worth more per pound than the Doge's crown jewels. Alessandro's hands trembled as he examined the cargo, not from fear, but from the intoxicating realization of what this meant. One successful run netted profits equal to 6 months of legitimate spice trading. But Alessandro was no amateur criminal. He understood something most traffickers never grasp. True power comes from making everyone dependent on your success. Within months, he was recruiting allies across the Mediterranean. The Barbarigo family controlled shipping routes to Constantinople. Alessandro offered them partnership, not competition. The Mocenigo merchants dominated North African ports. He brought them into the network with promises of shared territories. This wasn't random crime. This was corporate expansion. Alessandro's genius lay in compartmentalization. Each family controlled their own section of the operation. The Barbarigos handled Ottoman connections, but knew nothing about North African routes. The Mocenegos managed cargo distribution, but remained ignorant of source suppliers. Even within his own family, Alessandro's brothers managed different aspects without seeing the complete network. If authorities caught one section, they couldn't destroy the whole operation. The Venetian canal system became his greatest weapon. Unlike other ports with single entry points, Venice offered dozens of hidden waterways. Cargo could disappear into the maze of canals, emerging miles away in seemingly unconnected warehouses. Officials trying to track shipments found themselves lost in a liquid labyrinth designed by centuries of smugglers. But Alessandro's most revolutionary innovation was legitimacy. Every opium shipment traveled alongside genuine spices. Every trafficking vessel carried authentic trading documents. Every corrupted official received payments disguised as legitimate business expenses. The operation became so embedded within legal commerce that destroying it would cripple Venice's entire economy. By 1850, the network stretched from British India to Paris Salon. Venetian nobles were hosting dinner parties where European aristocrats unknowingly consumed derivatives of Alessandro's cargo. Doctors prescribed medicines containing his opium. Artists and writers credited their creativity to substances flowing through his channels. The Grimaldi family had become invisible puppeteers controlling Europe's emerging drug appetite. Alessandro's ambition was growing faster than his caution. He began targeting new markets, the Americas, where gold rush prosperity created unlimited demand, German states, where industrial revolution stress drove recreational consumption, even the Vatican, where certain cardinals developed expensive habits requiring discrete supply chains. The expansion model, the corruption strategy, the legitimacy facade, the compartmentalized structure. Modern traffickers follow Alessandro's blueprint without realizing they're copying a 19th century Venetian merchant prince. Every technique they consider revolutionary was perfected in Venice's canals 2 centuries ago. But Alessandro's greatest innovation wasn't in smuggling, it was in respectability. Comment below which method surprises you most. Alessandro Grimaldi discovered that customs officials couldn't inspect what they couldn't see. Double-hulled ships were already common for Mediterranean spice traders, vessels designed to protect valuable cargo from saltwater damage. Alessandro realized these protective barriers created perfect hiding spaces. His shipbuilders modified existing designs, creating compartments accessible only through removable deck planks that appeared to be standard maintenance hatches. British naval records from 1851 document suspicious Venetian vessels, but customs inspectors found nothing because they were looking in the wrong places. The real breakthrough came from studying legitimate pharmaceutical trade. Opium was already legal medicine throughout Europe. Doctors prescribed laudanum for everything from coughing to childbirth pain. Alessandro's genius was exploiting the volume difference between raw and processed opium. He could ship massive quantities disguised as legitimate medical supplies. Medical opium looked identical to illegal opium because it was the same substance. Alessandro's money laundering system copied methods perfected by medieval Italian bankers. The Medici family had pioneered using art purchases to move money across borders 2 centuries earlier. Alessandro updated their techniques, buying paintings and sculptures at inflated prices from cooperative artists, then reselling them in different countries at losses that were actually profit transfers. Venetian art markets became washing machines for drug money. His intelligence network exploited existing social structures rather than creating new ones. Venice's gambling houses already attracted nobles with debts and secrets. Alessandro simply became their most generous creditor, accepting information as payment when gold ran out. Desperate aristocrats traded political gossip for debt forgiveness. Europe's ruling classes were financing their own surveillance. The corruption system followed patterns established during Napoleon's occupation. French administrators had demonstrated how small regular payments were less suspicious than large bribes. Alessandro adopted this approach, providing customs officials with trading licenses that generated steady income while ensuring favorable treatment. Officials stopped seeing bribes and started seeing business partnerships. Alessandro's greatest innovation was geographic diversification. Previous smugglers concentrated operations in single ports, creating vulnerable choke points. He distributed activities across 17 Mediterranean harbors, from Marseille to Constantinople. If authorities cracked down on one location, operations simply increased elsewhere. The network became too distributed to destroy completely. His timing exploited political chaos perfectly. The revolutions of 1848 left European governments focused on internal rebellions rather than trade monitoring. Border controls were relaxed, customs enforcement was reduced, and official attention was directed toward political threats instead of commercial crimes. Revolutionary upheaval created smuggling opportunities that lasted for years. The religious pilgrimage exploitation was historically documented. Merchants had used pilgrimage routes for centuries to avoid paying standard trade taxes. Alessandro's innovation was using this ancient system for modern contraband. Legitimate pilgrims carried sealed packages they believed contained religious artifacts, but actually held opium destined for European cities. Medieval tax avoidance became modern drug trafficking infrastructure. His supply chain management borrowed directly from Venetian spice trading traditions. For centuries, Venice had dominated European markets by controlling quality and creating artificial scarcity. Alessandro applied identical principles to opium, maintaining consistent product quality, while limiting supply to keep prices elevated. Traditional business practices became criminal enterprise strategies. The protection system exploited existing noble privileges. Venetian aristocrats enjoyed legal immunities dating back to the Byzantine Empire. Alessandro's family connections meant his ships operated under protective legislation designed for legitimate commerce. Authorities couldn't search vessels owned by certain noble families without complex legal procedures. Ancient privileges became modern criminal shields. By 1853, Alessandro controlled an estimated 40% of Mediterranean opium flow, using methods that required minimal innovation, just creative application of existing systems. His success came from understanding that the most effective criminal operations hide inside legitimate structures, rather than operating outside them. But Alessandro's confidence in these traditional methods would soon encounter something no medieval merchant had ever faced: modern British naval intelligence. Comment below which historical method surprises you most. By 1854, Alessandro Grimaldi was richer than the Austrian emperor, who supposedly ruled Venice. His annual income exceeded 2.3 million gold florins, equivalent to roughly $400 million today. But wealth was just the foundation of something far more dangerous. Alessandro had become essentially untouchable through a web of dependencies that reached into every level of European society. The numbers were staggering, and they were about to get worse. Grimaldi vessels controlled 73 ports across 3 continents. His opium moved through shipping lanes that carried 60% of Mediterranean commerce. Disrupting Alessandro's network meant crippling legitimate trade for millions of merchants who had no idea they were dependent on a criminal enterprise. European governments couldn't destroy him without destroying their own economies. The family's public reputation reached absurd heights during this period. Alessandro funded orphanages in Venice, sponsored religious festivals, and donated generously to Austrian war efforts. Newspapers praised the Grimaldis as exemplary citizens. The Vatican awarded Alessandro a papal medal for charitable contributions. Every act of generosity was funded by narcotics profits, and everyone celebrated it. His political protection operated at the highest levels. The Austrian Governor-General of Venice, Count Ferdinand von Zichy, regularly attended Grimaldi dinner parties. Habsburg archdukes borrowed money from Alessandro's banks. Even Metternich's intelligence service relied on information gathered through Grimaldi trade networks. The criminal had become indispensable to the empire, supposedly hunting criminals. Alessandro's brothers had evolved from simple merchants into sophisticated criminal administrators. Michele Grimaldi controlled North African operations from a palace in Tunis. Lorenzo managed Ottoman connections from Constantinople. Roberto coordinated American expansion from a New York mansion. The family commanded a multinational corporation disguised as traditional Italian business. 4 brothers were running criminal operations across 4 continents simultaneously. The legitimacy facade reached ridiculous proportions by 1855. Alessandro's eldest daughter was engaged to a minor Habsburg prince. His wife hosted Vienna's most exclusive salons. His youngest brother had been appointed honorary consul for several German states. The Grimaldi name appeared on church dedications, university endowments, and charitable foundations across Europe. A drug trafficking family had infiltrated European nobility at the highest levels. Alessandro's confidence during this period bordered on arrogance. He began keeping detailed records of his operations, not for security but for pride. Ledgers documented every shipment, every bribe, every political connection. He commissioned portraits showing himself surrounded by symbols of his legitimate success. The criminal mastermind was creating evidence of his own crimes for posterity. His intelligence network had become so sophisticated that Alessandro often knew about government anti-smuggling operations before the officials tasked with conducting them. Customs investigations were reported to him within hours. Naval patrol routes were delivered to his desk weekly. He had achieved the ultimate criminal advance warning of every threat. Alessandro believed he had become completely immune to law enforcement. The peak year was 1856. Grimaldi operations generated profits exceeding several national treasuries combined. His network employed over 3,000 people across Europe and beyond. Political protection reached from Venice to Vienna to Vatican City. The family enjoyed social status rivaling established royalty. But Alessandro's greatest strength was about to become his fatal weakness. Hit that subscribe button, because what toppled this empire will shock you. The same detailed records that fed his ego were about to feed British intelligence services information that would destroy everything he had built. The downfall and consequences. Alessandro's downfall began with a single love letter intercepted by British spies. In March 1857, his youngest brother Roberto fell in love with an English diplomat's daughter in New York. Their romantic correspondence passed through British diplomatic pouches, where intelligence officers routinely monitored communications. Roberto's passionate letters mentioned family business successes and Mediterranean investments in detail that immediately caught attention. Love had compromised the world's most sophisticated criminal network. British naval intelligence had been tracking unusual Venetian shipping patterns since 1855, but they lacked concrete evidence. Roberto's letters provided missing connections between legitimate trade and suspicious cargo movements. Within weeks, British agents were monitoring Grimaldi operations across 3 continents. The hunters had finally found their prey's weakness. Alessandro's meticulous record-keeping became his executioner's axe. British agents discovered that Grimaldi operations followed predictable patterns. The same shipping schedules, the same port rotations, the same courier networks that had generated such massive profits. Predictability had replaced security. Success had bred fatal complacency. The British strike came during Venice's carnival season of 1858, when the city was crowded with masked revelers and distracted officials. Royal Navy vessels simultaneously raided Grimaldi warehouses in Venice, Marseille, Naples and Constantinople. Coordinated arrests netted over 200 operatives in a single night. Carnival masks couldn't hide from British planning. Alessandro's political protectors abandoned him with shocking speed. Austrian officials, who had attended his dinner parties, suddenly denied knowing him personally. Habsburg nobles repaid loans immediately to distance themselves from scandal. Even the Vatican quietly returned his charitable donations through intermediaries. Power built on corruption crumbles the moment corruption becomes visible. The trial proceedings revealed the operation's true scope for the first time. Evidence included 8047 detailed shipping manifests, correspondence with 56 government officials, and financial records documenting bribes totaling over 400,000 florins. European newspapers published daily updates, transforming Alessandro from respected merchant into notorious criminal celebrity. The same documentation that fed his pride now fed public outrage. Austrian justice moved with unusual efficiency. Alessandro received life imprisonment in Spielberg Fortress. His brothers faced various sentences ranging from 20 years to execution. The Grimaldi fortune, estimated at 4.7 million florins, was confiscated entirely, with proceeds funding new anti-smuggling patrol vessels. The empire built on water dissolved back into water. But Alessandro's story contained a crucial lesson about criminal overreach. His network succeeded through discretion and invisibility, operating within legitimate systems rather than challenging them. The moment he began flaunting success publicly, keeping detailed records, and treating crime like a conventional business, he created vulnerabilities that skilled opponents could exploit. Pride had transformed criminal genius into criminal evidence. The Austrian Empire used Grimaldi assets to establish the Mediterranean Anti-Smuggling Squadron, the first international law enforcement cooperation specifically targeting drug trafficking. Ironically, Alessandro's own money-funded systems designed to prevent future Alessandro Grimaldis from emerging. Crime had been forced to finance its own opposition, but their legacy had already escaped Venice, carried by former associates who learned from Alessandro's mistakes and would soon establish operations in Sicily, Corsica, and eventually the Americas. Share this video if you want to see how criminal empires really fall. The blueprint survived even when its creator didn't. 3 former Grimaldi operatives founded the organizations that would become the Sicilian Mafia. Giuseppe Fontana, Alessandro's former Constantinople coordinator, relocated to Palermo in 1859, carrying detailed notes about compartmentalization techniques. Within 2 years, he had established protection rackets using identical structures, independent cells operating under family authority, legitimate businesses providing cover, and corruption networks extending into government offices. The Grimaldi model had found its new home in Sicily. Antonio Badalamenti, a former Grimaldi courier, introduced the concept of legitimate fronts to Corsican smuggling operations. His innovation was applying Alessandro's art laundering techniques to newer products, weapons, tobacco, and eventually heroin. The same Venetian methods, updated for different markets and different centuries. Crime was evolving, but the fundamental strategies remained unchanged. The Colombian connection emerged through an unexpected source: Italian immigrants to South America. In the 1880s, former associates of Grimaldi operations established themselves in emerging cocaine regions, bringing organizational knowledge refined in Mediterranean operations. The compartmentalized structure, the corruption systems, the geographic diversification, all Venetian innovations adapted for Andean conditions. Alessandro's ghost was building cartels in jungles he never imagined. Even modern digital trafficking follows patterns. Alessandro established in 1850, cryptocurrency laundering mirrors his art purchase schemes. Dark web marketplaces use his compartmentalization principles. International money transfers exploit the same regulatory gaps he identified between different jurisdictions. Technology changes, but criminal psychology remains constant. The most chilling parallel involves political corruption. Alessandro's technique of making officials dependent on criminal success, rather than simply bribing them, appears in every major trafficking organization since 1858. From Escobar's approach with Colombian politicians to modern cartel infiltration of Mexican government, the strategy remains identical. Addiction creates more reliable allies than money alone. Law enforcement agencies worldwide still combat Alessandro's innovations daily. Multi-jurisdictional investigations exist because criminals learn to distribute operations across borders. Financial intelligence units exist because criminals learn to hide money in legitimate investments. Undercover operations exist because criminals learn to operate within legal frameworks. Modern policing evolved to fight techniques perfected in Venice 70 years ago. Share this video. Most people have no idea where organized crime tactics really originated. The life lessons from Alessandro's story cut through centuries of criminal mythology. First, corruption always contains the seeds of its own destruction. The same networks that provide protection eventually provide evidence. Second, success based on exploitation creates enemies faster than it creates security. But the most important lesson concerns recognition. Understanding how criminal enterprises embed themselves within legitimate systems helps societies identify and resist them before they achieve Alessandro's level of influence. The Grimaldi blueprint survived because it worked too well to forget. Every major criminal organization since 1858 has studied, adapted, and improved upon methods developed in Venetian canals. Subscribe for more hidden histories that shaped our dangerous world. Alessandro's imprisonment ended, but his influence never did. Alessandro Grimaldi died in prison in 1863, but his methods are generating billions in criminal profits right now. Every sophisticated trafficking operation active today uses techniques he pioneered in Venice. The compartmentalized structures prevent law enforcement penetration. The legitimate business fronts provide operational cover, systematic corruption, creating political protection. The geographic diversification avoids concentrated vulnerability. Criminal innovation peaked 60 years ago, and nothing since has been truly original. This story matters because Alessandro's descendants aren't just in organized crime, they're in corporate boardrooms, political offices, and regulatory agencies. The same psychology that drove 19th-century opium trafficking drives modern financial fraud, political corruption, and corporate exploitation. Power built on hidden dependencies always follows identical patterns. The ultimate lesson transcends criminal history. Sophisticated corruption doesn't announce itself through violence or obvious criminality. It succeeds by becoming indispensable to the systems supposedly designed to stop it. Alessandro's network thrived because destroying it would have hurt legitimate interests more than criminal ones. Modern corruption operates using his exact playbook. Recognition remains our best defense. Understanding how criminal enterprises embed within legitimate frameworks helps societies identify threats before they achieve Alessandro-level influence. Every community faces versions of the same choice. Alessandro offered his contemporaries short-term benefits in exchange for long-term control. Subscribe for more hidden histories that shaped our world, because the next episode reveals how Sicilian crime families brought these same organizational methods to America's shores in the 1880s. The tradition of invisible empires crossed the Atlantic with Italian immigration,